Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, your host, and today we've got a heck of an episode. We've got the ultimate keto diet guide for 2024, but this is going to be something that lasts for years to come. We've got Lisa in the house running the ship as always. Lisa, how are you? You're not in South America. Where are you at?
Well, I'm Central America now, so I'm in Mexico. I'm slowly creeping up.
Yeah, we're trying to, like I've said on numerous podcasts, our whole goal here is to get you to the United States permanently. But yeah, so you've just gotten to Mexico then, right?
Yes, so uprooted on Saturday from Colombia and now settling in, which was reasonably easy because I already know where the gym is here and kind of I've lived here in Playa del Carmen before for 7 months a couple of years ago, so I'm quite familiar with what this style of life is like here. But I'm also very excited for the episode. We were talking about it earlier, just in the sense of personal experiences, and I have never actually done a proper keto diet myself. Low carb, yes, with like 80 to 100 grams of carb, but not keto. Taking people through it, but yeah, I'm very excited to hear your own experiences with it, and of course those of your clients as well.
Yeah, it's something to where I have been such a nerd when it comes to nutrition and trying a lot of the stuff that, back when I first did keto, it was 2007. And I remember running it the first time myself. And with almost everything that I do with clients, 99.9% of the time I do it myself and I'm the guinea pig and I figure out how to do it right. And I find out what's good and bad and I figure out a system and then I start using with clients. Whether it's rapid fat loss and diet breaks that I've recently done or keto back in 2007. And my experience with keto has changed so much over the years, and I continue to learn every single year. And that's what I want our listeners. Maybe you're a diet coach and you work with people, maybe you're a trainer, maybe you're somebody that just loves physique enhancement. Always take this information that Lisa and myself put out, take it, apply it, learn from it, question everything. It doesn't matter if you feel like we're the experts, question everything and then try and find ways to make it better for you. And that's what I've done with keto over the years, Lisa. And I'm excited to talk about this guide. I know people are going to be able to take it and apply it to their clients right away or themselves. And it's going to answer a lot of the questions and myths. Like you've done a really good job of getting everything put together. So it's kind of a complete guide. That's why we're calling it the ultimate keto guide. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Yeah, let's get started with even just defining what is a ketogenic diet. I do think, especially at the moment, that it's become so popular and mainstream, it's very misunderstood. Most people get that it's high fat, but what does it really mean?
Yeah, so everything when we talk about is going to take place in the realm of physique enhancement, right? We're trying to be our leanest, most muscular, healthiest physique, right? So when a lot of people hear keto, they think of Atkins, they think of, I mean, you get carnivore diet now, they think of low carb, like they think of it just eating bacon and cheese, like there's all these things, right? Being on a ketogenic diet, it's a process in the body. Being in the state of ketosis, which we're going to quickly break down here in just a minute, that's a process of the body. And it's when your body stops using carbohydrates for fuel, which, our bodies run off of glucose and carbohydrates. It's designed that way the most efficiently, right? But if you restrict carbohydrates, your body starts turning, fats that you eat, stored body fat, it starts turning those fats into what's called a ketone. And that's what you run off of instead of carbohydrates and glucose for the most part. So that's why it's called a ketogenic diet. You switch the fuel sources in your body. Now, you don't have to have carbohydrates to live and survive. Like Eskimos have lived off of a ketogenic diet for centuries, basically, like way back in the day, like they're literally eating fish, right? And it's just protein and fats. And that's what a ketogenic diet is. And there's a lot of benefits to it, which we'll get into. But that's what it is. Essentially, people need to think of it as a process in the body. And that's what I want my friend Ben Azadi, who owns Keto Camp, and I'll be working with him on Elite Physique University soon here on our YouTube channel. He likes to refer to it as a process in the body, and that makes sense. It's not a diet. Think about it as a process in the body, right?
Mm.
So that's essentially what it is, and there's all kinds of different uses for it.
Yeah, to my knowledge, the first really, let's say, uses in more our societies where I guess historically speaking, the base was usually more grains or starches of the diet and so on. I think the first uses of more of a ketogenic approach or getting the body into a ketogenic state was more in clinical settings for things like epilepsy
Yep.
or so that's what from what I'm aware of, where the first research pops up, like in the, I don't know, 1920s or whatever, whether they started experimenting with that very successfully so. And then the more mainstream uses, as you mentioned, like Atkins was probably like 80s, or I don't even know when that sort of started, where it became more popular as a weight loss approach. But yeah, nowadays people use it in all kinds of settings. And as you said, unfortunately so often so wrong in the sense of just butter and cheese and whatnot, and often also thinking they're in ketosis, although they're probably or very likely not. So let's just say they might eat low or very high fat and low carb for 2 3 days, and then they have a binge meal, or they go out for dinner and allow themselves
Right.
some pizza and bread, and then they go back to their low carb diet and for a day or two, and then they have something else that completely prevents them from even reaching that state of ketosis at all.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see a similar trend in your environment.
It is. So let me, that's a good way to start this. Let me tell people, how do you get into ketosis? What's that look like and how long does it take? So we'll just say, Lisa will use you as an example. Say you're eating 200 carbs a day, you feel good, you're training as well on that, and that's your maintenance, and your body is carb adapted. It's used to burning glucose as fuel, right? It's not making ketones or anything like that. For the next week, we're going to drop those carbs down to basically just trace carbs. Like there's a gram of carbs in whey protein, or in peanut butter there's 2 or 3 carbs, even though it's mostly fiber. Broccoli and vegetables, like usually it's half natural sugars and half fiber. So like a cup of broccoli I think has 4 carbs, 2 fiber, and 2 natural sugars, right? I call those trace carbs. Basically, you want to only have those on a ketogenic diet, and you drop out oatmeal and potatoes. You drop all that out and you replace it with fats. And the type of fats we'll get to later. So, what we're going to do is take you from 200 carbs down to about, just say 30 total, counting fiber and trace carbs. And you're going to train all week. And what happens is you start to deplete glycogen from the muscle and the liver, and you're not running off of it. And as you start to bottom out and your liver glycogen starts to run really low, what happens is you're going to, most people go through this little phase of about 24 hours. It's called the keto flu. And that's when your gas tank, your liver, is ultimately you're running on empty. So you don't have stored glycogen to use as energy, but you haven't started making ketones from fat yet. So you don't have a lot of energy for about 24 hours, and you get a headache, you feel lethargic and tired. And this is where most people quit about 3 to 4 to 5 days in. They're like, hell with this. What are you doing to me? I'm going to eat some carbs. And they break and they go eat carbs. But then they say, hey, I'm doing keto, but I'm carving up every 4 to 5 days. You're actually never reaching ketosis. So what happens is push through that phase, that little 3 to 4 5 day window, and all of a sudden your glycogen's gone that you're running off of, and now you start making ketones and fats for fuel. And this is where it gets really fun and interesting. Um, Ketones basically they yield 7 calories per gram, where if you burn glucose, if you burn carbs, you're burning 4. So just at rest, when you're on a fat adapted diet and you're in a ketogenic state, just sitting here, by the way, I'm keto right now. Just sitting here, I'm burning 7 calories per gram just doing the work that I do, right? So it's pretty interesting. And my blood sugar levels or anyone else that's ketogenic, fats, you don't have ups and downs, right? So like when you eat a carb-based diet, you eat carbs, you feel good, your blood sugar's going up, you have a little energy, and then it starts to come back down, and our body's like, hey, blood sugar's starting to come down a little bit, and then you're hungry again. And of course, if you eat sugar, it goes up real fast and then it drops real hard. It doesn't happen like that with fats. It's a very stable fuel source. So that's how you reach the state of being in ketosis. And it usually, I can get someone in ketosis normally in about 4 to 5 days on average. And there are tricks to get there, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But that's how you do it. And you don't want to carb up. You don't want to interrupt that process. You want to just keep your ketogenic diet and the macros that you're on straight across the board. And it's a really good feeling. Now, When you reach that and say you're 5, 6 days in, you will wake up and you will feel just great. Your mental clarity will be there. Your energy in the gym is very interesting. You just feel good. It's like someone just kind of turned the lights on after a couple of days of feeling like because you weren't quite there. So it's honestly, I'm a geek, so I love it. It's a pretty cool process to experience.
My question to you is, do you recommend people measure that they're getting into ketosis? So like with a urine or blood or whatever test,
You
I guess.
you can measure it by blood. That's the best way to do it. You need to be 0.5 or higher to be in a state of ketosis. Um, so on your it's like checking your blood sugar, right? Except it's going to measure ketones. You need to be 0.5 or higher. And then once you're really in ketosis, like you'll see readings of, 1, 1.5, and some people see twos. It just depends. That shows the ketones in the blood. So that will tell you that you're in ketosis. There are pee sticks. People can use those. The problem is, excuse me, it's diluted, right? So if you check those and you say you've had 3/4 of a gallon of water today and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to show ketones, but it's only going to show light ketones because you've got so much water, right,
Mm.
in your body. So it's going to show a lower concentration of ketones. And people pee on sticks in the afternoon. They're like, it's not showing I'm in ketosis. No, it's just because you're super hydrated. If you use pee sticks, check them first thing in the morning, wake up, go to the bathroom. But even typically then, I don't even have and ask people to measure with blood or on a pee stick. I go by how they feel. Because here's the thing, if you're not eating carbs and you're only getting the trace carbs and fiber, and your protein's not too high, which we'll talk about the setup here shortly so everybody knows how to set their protein. If your protein's not too high, because it turns over if it's too high and it converts gluconeogenesis, however people want to say it, it converts high protein into carbs. So as long as your protein's not too high and your trace carbs and fiber are okay, you're going to be in a ketogenic state. Um, and that's just the way that it is. And most people that feel good, I know they're good. Now, if 2 weeks in, they're like, hey, I feel like crap, I have a slight headache, then I start looking at the little things. I know their protein's not too high because I said it, and they're only eating trace carbs and fiber. So I know that's okay. So then I start peeling back the curtain, and it's the little things that add up. Well, I'm using 4 Splenda packets in my coffee twice a day, and they're getting a lot of artificial sweeteners. Well, all those yield about a carb or so a piece, right? Well, those can add up to where and they're using some coffee creamer that's got 4 or 5 carbs in it. And it's the little thing. And they're chewing a pack of gum a day, by the way. There's 20 carbs. Boom. So now their carbs are really 60 to 70. And what's happening is it's trying to like give you some glycogen to store in your liver, and your liver's trying to produce ketones. And you're in this influx state to where it's like, am I in ketosis or am I going to burn these carbs? So then you have that slight keto flu. So what I do is I go through and eliminate all that stuff. Be like, hey, pull your gum out for a little bit. Don't chew a pack, chew a couple pieces a day. That's fine. Your coffee creamer, let's go with some half and half, or let's go with some full fat whipping cream is totally fine. Let's not use 8 packets of Splenda today. Let's cut that down to, 2 every time. Like you can just cut it back a little. You can still enjoy things, but it's typically that I see get out of control.
Super interesting. And I mean, speaking of setup, I'm very interested when we're getting into the protein level, et cetera, because I know historically, also the traditional keto diet would be actually low-ish in protein or lower in protein that we set it in like a physique enhancement setting. But before we talk about that, why don't we touch on the fact why we drop weight so quickly going
Yes.
into a ketogenic diet? Because I think also that is wildly misunderstood in the generic realm, maybe not the people listening to this, but just generically, oh, I dropped so much weight in the first week of keto. I lost like 7 pounds. And you're like, okay, that was definitely not all body fat.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really interesting. Well, here's the thing. I can predict what you would drop. I say if I'm 209 and I start keto, I'm typically gonna drop about 5 pounds the first week. What do you weigh, Lisa? Are you like 120, 125?
126 sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if you were 126 and we started your diet and you were eating 200-ish carbs a day, somewhere in that range, I would imagine you're going to drop about 3 pounds that first week. And here's what it's going to be. If you're in a deficit and we drop your calories too with keto, and that's the thing people need to understand. Like you're going to drop body fat if you create a deficit. And we're going to get to the unicorn part of this to where you actually can drop body fat without dropping calories, but it's a hormone issue. And we're going to talk about that later. But, say we create a deficit, you're going to drop a little bit of body fat, but most of the first drop is going to be glycogen because you're depleting glycogen. And with glycogen, your muscles flatten out. Also comes water. So there's a large part of that where you're not holding on as much water. When insulin's low, you're also not going to hold on to as much water because you're not storing carbohydrates over and over and over again. So typically it's mostly glycogen and water that you're dropping. And a lot of people will tighten. They will look a little bit better depending on where they're at. And let's be honest, I think most people like seeing that drop. They feel better. I initially know that I love the way I look at, say, if I drop down to 203, 204 versus, 208, 209, because my face looks better. Like you're going to drop body water everywhere, but, you're not going to just hold as much water in general. So, it's it's a nice side benefit, but people don't need to get hung up on that because then once
Well,
that initial week goes, then now you're bottomed out and you've got your baseline, right? So at least maybe you're 126, you're 123 next week. Now we're aiming, if you're in fat loss phase, now we're aiming for 122. And then the week after a 121. So then it's only for that first week. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut
no,
you
I
off.
was just I was just going to say I do think, just from what I have heard, but that it depends because of course if we're depleting glycogen as well, sometimes the muscle looks a bit flatter, so people might not necessarily like their look better. Yes, they might look less puffy perhaps, but also from a muscular perspective, you might on the flip side not look as quote unquote good, I guess. So I think it depends. And of course, I mean, you mentioned some positive aspects in the sense of mental clarity, etc. But I do also think that we need to mention the fact that you might not feel like you have as much energy in the gym, not just in the initial transition period, but perhaps very, very person dependent. But I could imagine that some people feel like they might not quite have that fifth gear or so, and when it comes to really pushing it, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. It's very interesting because in some ways it's the opposite, but in some ways there's also some negative aspects. So first of all, let's talk about skinny fat, right? Let's say I've went from 208, 209 to 204, whatever. My body fat didn't go down a lot, but now my muscles are flatter. So I still have most of the fat, but the muscles aren't pushing against the skin. There's this interesting period until you get fat adapted. So usually I've noticed it takes about 3 full weeks to get to where you start to actually fill back out. You start to build fats up in the muscle, like you put those intramuscular triglycerides back in. And salt has to stay very high on a ketogenic diet, by the way, because when insulin and carbs are low, you actually need more salt, right? So salt has to stay high and you actually start to fill back out once you become fat adapted. So about the 3 week mark, you'll start to notice better pumps in the gym. You're not going to feel like that skinny fat feeling that a lot of us feel that are, physique enhancement enthusiasts. So that is there. Now the training, this is where it's very interesting. When you go into train, the ability to recover between sets it's insanely fast, and you don't have the lactic acid buildup. So for people that are eating a carb-based diet, you go in and let's say you're doing tricep extensions with the rope, okay, and you do a set to say 15 and you fail at 15, it burns so bad that you fail from the lactic acid burn, right? You don't really get that in keto. Like it's weird. Like you just go until you just hit failure with those high reps and you literally can't fail from lactic acid buildup. It's just not there. I would say if you fail and you feel that lactic acid 100% on a carb-based diet, when you hit failure on keto, you feel it about 15%. It's just very interesting. But here's the other thing. Remember, you're using fats for fuel. So between sets, when you're on a carb-based diet, most of us, we need to rest like a minute and then we're ready to go again. Let the lactic acid start flush. On keto, I'm not kidding. Like I can wait 15, 30 seconds and I can get the same reps with the same weight because the
Mm.
energy source is just there and you don't have the lactic acid that's really hampering the workout. So you can actually go faster and your workouts can be faster. Not saying they should be, but the recovery is very interesting. Now, strength will not be the same, at least until you get fat adapted. So strength goes down. A lot of that is, things like being flatter, like you're not gonna have the same amount of strength. It just kind of is what it is. But once you get fat adapted, your strength, you can start to try and at least match what you were doing on carbs. You just need to make sure that, all the things are in place. You're still taking creatine, your salt's high, like all those things. But strength will never be matched on is the same as a carb-based diet. So like if you're a performance athlete or strength-based athlete, especially, performance is interesting, but strength-based, you definitely keto is not going to be the same as a carb-based diet.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're mentioning that in terms of performance as well. So anything that's going to be more glycolytically based, so powerlifting, CrossFit, definitely, even shorter endurance events, I would imagine, even if you are fat adapted, that you will probably not put up those same numbers. When we're talking about ultra endurance events, it's a from what my read
Yeah,
of the
keto
literature, it's
shines
different.
there. Yeah.
Event, yeah, but talking about ultra, not your 10K type of runner, right? That's very different. But let's talk about you mentioned here the three different types of keto and what they really are or how to set up for the diet specifically in terms of macros.
Yeah, let's and if we break down all three, what we would probably do is break down each episode into another short form episode because there's really three ways to do keto. There's a standard ketogenic diet, there's a cyclical ketogenic diet, and then there's a targeted ketogenic diet. We're going to focus today mainly on the standard ketogenic diet, which is essentially you're eating protein, you're eating fats, you're eliminating carbs, and you're getting enough fiber, and you're not doing carb ups, you're not eating carbs at all, and you just eat keto across the board for whatever time frame you're going to eat it, right? The other thing too, we probably should have started the show off by saying keto is a tool. Very few people do this as a lifestyle. There are people, but you're talking about, a tiny, tiny percentage of people that can do it year round. We're not telling people to do this year round. It's a tool to use. And we'll talk about things like insulin sensitivity and when to use it. But a standard keto diet is I tell my clients, let's do this for a short period of time, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8, and we're not going to have any carbs. We're going to run off of fats. The next type is a cyclical ketogenic diet, and that became popular with people like Dan Duchesne and others, where you go keto all week and then you carb up like every 7 to 10 days. I'm not a fan of this approach because then what happens, you interrupt the state of ketosis and you carb up, and then it's going to take you another 4 to 5 to 6 days to get back into ketosis. So if you're doing a carb up every week, you're literally spinning your wheels as far as being in ketosis. You're still low carb. There's still benefits there to clean up insulin sensitivity and things of that nature, but you're still going to have, most people are going to have keto flu once a week, and you're not getting the benefits of truly being in ketosis, all this sustained energy and feeling good, like all those things. So I'm not a big fan of the carb ups at all because they interrupt the process. And then the
Yeah, to me
targeting,
that sounds
yeah,
counterintuitive, to be honest, to have those in there just from a like even like you say from a physiological perspective. I imagine that to be quite stressful on the body, but also psychologically, like constantly going in and out. So
yeah. The
yeah, I
the
imagine.
interesting thing, sorry, the interesting thing is, I think what happened is when people were writing and putting these plans together, they didn't have people at scale doing this like we do these days. Like, I mean, there's a ton of us out there are coaches, like they're going to listen to this podcast and a lot of them are going to do it. Like the ability to reach people now, like we understand. And back in the day, people that are writing these plans, they're trying to think of, well, how can I get someone to stick to keto? Oh, well, they're going to carb up all day on Sunday, right? So like people look forward to that, and I did. That's what I did in 2007. I eat like 1,000 carbs on Sunday. Who the hell doesn't want to do that, right? But then about 4 or 5 days later, I'm like, why did I do that? I feel like trash. But then you stick it out 3 more days and you eat 1,000 more carbs. Um, so I think people had an idea, and we all try and experiment with things. So I'm not a fan of the carb ups though. Now, the next one's interesting, a targeted ketogenic diet. We should probably do a whole episode on this or a short question of the week. That's when you have carbs around your workout or during your workout. And it's not enough that it kicks you out of ketosis for the whole day or for days, but it's a small amount that your body can also run off of while you're in a ketogenic state. So let me give someone an example. Say I'm keto right now and I'm burning carb or I'm burning fats for fuel. And during my training, I want to drink 20 grams of carbs from dextrose. It's not enough to kick me out of ketosis. That dextrose is going to be used during the workout right away. It's not going to store in the liver and then trying to interrupt the processes. So I'm still burning ketones and I'm burning carbs. It's like taking the hood of a car and opening it and just dumping some gas right in the motor. It doesn't have to go through the whole car, through all the systems in the car. It just goes right to where it needs. So for people that are doing like a CrossFit workout, that is actually a really interesting time to take in some very fast acting carbs right before they go do their lift, right? Their workout. 20 carbs is super fast, and then they can draw off both forms of fuel. Another cool time that you can do it is like back in the day, Leslie and I were working together, and she was doing the MS 150. It's a long bike ride, 150 miles, and it was broken up into 2 days. One day was 75 miles, the next day was another 75 miles. And she was keto. And for endurance sports, keto is great because you have all this body fat on your body, even if you're shredded, like she is and was back then, you will never run out of fat for fuel. So you can literally run off your body stores, and it's a still stable fuel source. Well, what we found is about every hour, she would drink about 20 grams of carbs from dextrose, and it would be like adding extra fuel, but it didn't interrupt the process of ketosis. So she had more energy, and she did that, and she crushed the 150, like the MS 150. So there's interesting places to add some fast acting carbs. But I don't like to see people use carbs like fruit that has a lot of fructose, because fructose is primarily going right to the liver. So something like dextrose or some very fast acting sugars, those seem to work well.
And I think the important part that you highlighted is also just the timing, because
Mhm.
again, like people are gonna hear that or might hear something like that and use that as an excuse. Ah, I only had whatever, an apple here and there or whatever, and then like, but it was 2 hours before their workout, and that's
Yeah.
way different, even if it's 25 or 30 grams of carbs, but that's very, very different than what you're talking about. And but I mean, generally speaking, there are, as we alluded to earlier anyway, there are right and wrong ways to go about the keto diet aside from the setup. So let's talk about the fats first and foremost, like what type of fats, but also where would we set someone's fat target all in all, and or maybe starting with protein. I don't know what you find is easier. But I guess in terms of the types of fat also, you mentioned earlier like full cream and so on is okay. So we're not quite as concerned about saturated fats here, but we still want to make sure that most of the fats that we're adding in come from healthy fat sources, from poly and mono unsaturated fats. So things like avocado, like nuts, like olive oil, like the high quality meats and fish, as opposed to, like you said, just butter and cheese and whatever. And of course, more than perhaps in a more standard sort of setup. But just generally speaking, I do think it's important that we still are mindful of the quality.
Yeah, I know that you've got the show notes in front of you, and we're going to have these for our people. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be down in the description. If you're listening on the podcast on your phone, you'll see it's in the show notes. Lisa, if you would, let's just go ahead and put a spot here. How to start your diet setup, the macros, protein, carbs, and fats. And I'm just going to go ahead and give everybody the system now.
Mhm.
So, and then, we can go back and type this in. So the first step is to set your protein, right? So we're just going to take somebody that's just going to switch from a carb-based diet to keto. And I'll just use myself as an example. I'm eating, say, 2,500 calories. I'm eating a couple hundred grams of carbs, what have you. Um, the first thing that you want to do is leave your calories the same, but you want to set your protein. Now, this is what I found. Researchers, they do all the research based on, and this drives me crazy. And I have some really good friends in the research industry. Um, Man, it drives me crazy. They're like, set your, and this is not what to do, by the way. They say set your protein at 20% of your total calories, your carbs at 5%, and your fats at 75%, right? Well, the problem with that is if you're eating very high calorie, that doesn't make any sense because then your protein is going to be way too high. If you're dieting and you're getting ready to finish up a diet phase and you're a female eating 1,300 calories and you want to switch to keto, now your protein is super low. So for physique enhancement, all of that goes way out the window. So I don't care who the researcher is or who the influencer is or the expert is for physique enhancement, do not set it up that way. Here's the way to set it up. The first thing you do is set your protein at 1 gram per pound of your lean mass, of your muscle mass. And that's, I've found over the years, that's not, protein's not too high, it's not too low. So if it's too high, like I said earlier, it converts into carbs. You don't have to worry about that. So for me, I have 180 pounds of lean mass. You can go to any store or any gym that has a handheld electronic device and just use that. It gets you close enough, right? You don't have to go do a bod pod or you don't have to do a DEXA. Just get somewhere close, right? And figure out your lean mass. I've got 180, so I'm going to eat 180 grams of protein a day. Lisa, you're probably 126. We could probably set you at say 110, right? We could probably set your protein at 110 pounds for lean mass. And you'd probably be okay at 122. But what I'm saying is get it somewhere in that range. Now that's low for bodybuilding standards. When I'm eating carbs, I'm eating 250 grams of protein a day easily. But on a keto based diet, I want to drop that down. So there's step one for everybody listening. Figure out your lean mass and eat that in protein per day. So mine's 180. The next thing I'm going to do is my carbs are going to drop to about 30 a day. And that's what I talked about earlier. Trace carbs, fiber, eliminating all added carbs. So whatever's in the food, the protein and fats that you're eating naturally, and whatever's going to be in the fibrous vegetables that you're going to eat. Okay. So somewhere in that 30-ish range. Ladies, you're probably going to be down somewhere around 20. Guys, you're going to be somewhere, depending on the calories you're eating, 30 to 40 is fine. Just don't add carbs. And now the final step is you take the rest of the calories that you need and now you add those to fat. So say I was eating 2,500 calories a day. My protein's at 180. My carbs are at 30 a day. The rest of my calories would come out too, and I'm not going to do the math, but I know them. I'm going to eat about 150 to 180 grams of fat a day as well. So my macros are 180 protein, 30 trace carbs and fiber, and then about 180 fats a day. And I believe it's somewhere around 2,500 calories, if memory serves correct. I'm lower than that now because I'm dieting, but you guys see the point. That's how you set it up. Now, if you want to diet, you always leave the protein the same, you leave the carbs the same because they need to be in there, and you lower your fats because fats are your fuel source. To create a deficit, it's just like if you're eating carbs and you want to create a deficit, you drop your carbs lower, right? You create a deficit that way. This way, you're going to drop your fats lower. So if I wanted to diet, I might drop my fats down to say like 120 a day, for example, which is about where I'm at. But that's the best way to set it up for physique enhancement.
Best point really here, I think, is the making sure not to set up protein way, way, way too high.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is in our space at least, that's probably one of the dangers. But yeah, aside from that, so you mentioned that researchers often set up a keto diet falsely, but also mentioning that the old school keto setup was different too, with very low carb and low fat and super high
Ooh,
protein. Is
yeah.
that correct?
Massive mistake. So there's still a lot of people, especially in the bodybuilding community, they want to use this old harsh setup to where they jack protein way up. So they say someone was going to diet me that way. My protein may be like 300 grams a day or 250 to 300 a day. And my carbs would be non-existent, right? Just the trace and fiber. And then fats would also be low. So then what happens is you don't have enough fats to use as energy. Your body's trying to convert protein over because it's so high. And by the way, that conversion is not a good process. It's not,
Very inefficient.
that's the word I was looking for. It's very inefficient. Converting protein to fuel is the most inefficient fuel source that we can get. But it's going to do that because you're low on carbs and fats. So now your body breaks into aminos. And by the way, when that process in the body is happening, it's not just doing it to the food you're taking in, it's doing it to your muscle because your muscle is aminos, your muscle is protein. So if you want to lose muscle, do a very high protein, low fat, low carb diet. You're literally going to strip muscle. You'll be in a state of converting aminos to fuel, to protein to fuel, and that's not good.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't make any sense why they would have thought that they would get into ketosis on such a low fat diet. But I mean, I don't know what the logic behind that would have been or their reasoning behind
Yeah,
that.
it's just old school. It just goes back to like the fish and asparagus diet back
Right,
in the, Arnold's era, and like people like that stuff still gets passed on. I mean, listen, people that are using a lot of anabolics, they're not going to lose as much muscle. They will diet super harshly because they can get shredded that way, and
Mhm.
they just suffer and go through it. But for the
Right.
rest of the mortals out there, like especially if you're natural, especially if you're female, like you've got to be real careful with hormones. So definitely don't ever do that approach.
Um, when we're talking about going into ketosis, what are some ways that people can perhaps speed up the way that they enter ketosis as opposed to like maybe taking longer than 4 days, maybe already going into ketosis on day 2 or 3?
Yes. So this is like the way to hack your way into ketosis as fast as possible. So I have a whole document that I send my clients. And it has step by step what to do. And one of the main things is you up your rep ranges. So you always train in the 20 to 30 rep range for the first week or two, because what's that do? It depletes glycogen faster. So like if you were training in the 8 rep range and doing, a chest workout, now if you switch that to all your sets are in the 20 to 30 rep range, now you're depleting muscle and liver glycogen faster because higher reps do that, right? So that means the less time that you have to spend burning through glycogen, you're going to get there faster. And
Mm.
that's why I see people get there in about 4 to 5 days on average, where a lot of the times people it's taken them a week or more because they haven't upped their rep ranges. So that's what I like to do. Another trick and tip is to use a glucose disposal agent. We make one. And what that does is it lowers blood sugar and it helps blood sugar store, right? So the more you're pushing that down, the more your liver has to then kick more out, right? So it's a natural process to help you deplete glycogen a little bit faster is whatever you've got floating around your bloodstream, you take a glucose disposal agent. Now, nothing over the counter is going to ever drop someone hypo. Like it's just not going to happen. Like people worry about that. It's not. So berberine specifically is very, very good about this. Hell, even metformin, you're not going to drop your blood sugar on metformin. It just doesn't work that way. So say your blood sugar is floating around at say 90, right? And you take a glucose disposal agent with one of your meals, it starts to lower your blood sugar. Well, your body isn't going to let that happen. It's not going to let you go hypo. So the liver starts kicking out more blood sugar to get that back up. Well, now you're burning through that and you're depleting glycogen faster. So using a glucose disposal agent for the first couple of days it's a nice little tip and trick that I like to use. A lot of people don't know that. But now our listeners do. So like there you go. It's a cool chip. And by the way, it's also nice to have on hand to where if you do slip up and you eat carbs, you're out, and you're stuck and you need to eat something and you eat some carbs. Take the GDA with it and take the GDA the next day. It's gonna help get you in ketosis faster again. So yeah, those are the two things that really help.
That's no, I think that's a really great tip with the GDA, especially if someone was to do a longer term and within that period, let's just say they have a birthday dinner come up or whatever,
Mhm.
and inevitably they do want to have a piece of cake. And so what do? If they're jumping right back into keto the next day, this could be a really good way to go about it, I guess.
It's the absolute perfect way to go. And here's the other thing people need to realize. Once you're ketogenic, you're depleted, right? Your insulin sensitivity is improved. If you do eat some carbs, those carbs are going to store primarily, like it's going to be very hard. You'd have to really overeat carbs to store fat. So, like if you do eat a piece of cake, like don't worry about it. Take a GDA, do some high reps the next day. You're going to get right back into ketosis because you're depleted. That gas tank is empty. You're just going to put a little gas in and then you're just going to burn back through it the next day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we're going to talk about how to transition out of keto later on or in the next episode, because I
Yeah.
think I mean, you mentioned, okay, for one instance, this is fine, but then afterwards, I think the majority of people probably go about it in a bad way when it comes to going out of transitioning out of keto, or they literally just went from one day to another, jump back into their previous normal diet or whatever that means. But before we talk about that, going back into the starting period of when people have the keto flu, because almost everyone is going to go through that. You mentioned it's important that salts are high. What are some other things to look out for? You mentioned headaches. What might be some other symptoms?
Yeah, so the keto flu is very real, and there's a product that you can take out there. It's keto salts, basically, BHB salts. And I always recommend New Ethics Essential Energy. A good friend of mine, business partner Jason Theobald, owns that company along with Vince and Stephanie. Jason designed that product, and it's got keto salts in there. And what happens is those convert over into ketones, and you start to have more energy. So taking a scoop of that on your way to the gym, kind of like a pre-workout, gives you the energy that you don't have because you don't have ketones being made by your body yet. So, maybe on days, 2, 3, and 4, you take a scoop a day on your way to the gym, and it just helps you feel better. Your mental clarity is a little bit better. Now, once you get into ketosis, you don't have to take them, but they are nice because there's a lot of salt in them. It helps your workouts be better. It is like a little boost of energy. I mean, it's like eating carbs before you train, right? It's similar to how you feel. So that will help with the headaches. So if you have a headache, drink a scoop of keto salts, right? And they also, by throwing keto salts in your body, it does lower your blood sugar because now your blood sugar lowers, your body's trying to burn ketones, right? Because you got a couple different fuel sources. So a lot of people say, if you drink, like right now, like you can just keep eating the carbs that you want, but drink keto salts and you're in a ketogenic state. That's not true. That's just because if you measure your blood, you're going to see elevated ketones. That doesn't mean you're in a ketogenic state. And that's why a few years ago, like you saw all these people with like Prove It and like all these other companies, they're like saying you can eat your normal diet, but you can still be in a ketogenic state and burn fats for fuel. It's like, oh, like you gave us all a bad name, like that they're trying to preach anything about keto, like we're all charlatans. So yeah, use that and make sure your salt's high. So most guys, you're gonna at least need to be 5 grams of salt a day, at least, especially around your workout, because like I said, when insulin's lower, you have less, you don't retain as much salt. Okay. So you need to make sure that your salt's higher. You'll notice if you don't up your salt, you'll pee and it'll be going right through you and it's clear, which is not what we want. Right. So make sure you up your salt, especially around the workout. I like to tell people add a quarter teaspoon of sea salt to most of your meals. Throw some in your workout drink. And the more water you drink, the more salt you need. So like that's just kind of a base. Females, most females I'm seeing over 3 grams at least for them, just because you're not retaining as much because carbs are low. So those two things seem to really, really make a big difference.
Just to clarify, are you talking about sodium or salt in grams? Because of course there's a difference. So like I think a gram of salt is 400 milligrams of sodium, right? So if we're talking about 3 grams, that would really not be all that much anyway.
Yeah, total sodium. I like to see
Sodium.
somewhere around 3 grams for females, 5 grams for guys,
Mhm.
total.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, just make
But
sure
just
they're not
to
too low.
clarify that. But going to the point of workouts that you just said, is there anything else specific around the workouts that you would change in a ketogenic state? Some people using MCTs or what to look out for when it comes to fiber.
Yeah, so an interesting, I'm glad that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Medium chain triglycerides are a fat that burn more quickly. They burn kind of like a carbohydrate burns. That's why they're called medium chain triglycerides. So a long chain triglyceride would be something like olive oil or peanuts. Like they're going to break down slowly. They're a long chain. A medium chain breaks down very quickly and it gives you energy a lot faster. So a short chain fatty acid, by the way, would be like motor oil, right? Like, not that we would ever do that, but if you drank motor oil, it'd move right through you, right? A medium chain, if you're not careful and you take too much, it will move right through you as like a laxative. So I like to try and limit MCTs to 5 grams or less each time you use it. And honestly, it's not even something that I recommend to people anymore because now you've got powdered MCTs out there. I think, there for a while, Quest was making some, and I've tried all these, by the way. It just got stomach upset. So I'm just like, you know what? BHB salts before you work out. Eat the fats that you enjoy pre-workout, and I like to still recommend a whey shake pre and post workout because it sits easier in your stomach and you don't feel bloated. I wouldn't go eat 8 ounces of steak and then go work out. You want to have whey around your workout. But as far as the fats, the only one that I feel is very good, and we can talk about saturated fats here in a minute, is full fat whipping cream, and it actually has some faster acting fats in it, some short chain, right? So coconut oil is another one. It's got some medium chain in it. You could do that as well, and that's not going to run right through you if you do some coconut oil. But both of those are very high in saturated fat. And here's the thing: we talked about this on one of our episodes not too long ago, probably 3 or 4 episodes ago. We want the fats to be as heart healthy as we can. And the reason why I say that is some people listening, you have no idea what your genetics look like, what your cholesterol level look like, what your heart history is going to end up looking like, and what your parents look like. Someone like me 10 years ago, I had no idea that I had massively bad genetic cholesterol. Someone like me needs to be low saturated fat, right? So I always tell people, look at your labs, understand that. I don't want to do a deep dive here, but it's always about being and we say heart healthy, but as much as you can, mono and polyunsaturated fats, just so you don't have to worry about things like elevated LDL and ApoB and things of that nature. Now, some people can get away with burger, butter, bacon, like all that cheeses, all that kind of stuff. They can totally get away with that because their cholesterol and their genetics dictate that. And I'm okay with that. It all depends, it all depends on how your body handles it. But if I could say across the board, I would rather see more macadamia nuts and macadamia nut oil, peanut butter, nuts, almonds. You said avocados earlier. Flax oil is a good one with omega 3s, eggs, fish oils, um, fish in general. So like those are the base of my diet for a heart healthy diet. And I think we should all strive for that. But coming full circle here, keto is hard as it is. So even me with my cholesterol being real bad, still once a week, I'm going to go out and I'm going to crush a triple cheeseburger with bacon on it. And I'm going to use some low sugar ketchup because I need something because I've been eating salmon all week and eggs and whey and peanut butter and pecans and like, by God, I need something to be normal. So once a week, I'm gonna go have that. Um, so it's hard enough to stick to without that.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I think lastly, before we round this part off, I do want to talk about some of the common myths that you have
Yes.
already touched on. So, for example, yeah, we talked about a lot of them, but for instance, that it actually hurts insulin sensitivity, or
Mm.
yeah, what are some other things you've come across?
Yeah. So one of the main things you hear a lot of people say, I don't want to do a keto diet, or I did a keto diet and I blew up afterwards. And made it to where I was carb sensitive. Well, it's actually the opposite. One of the best places to use a ketogenic diet is to improve your insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity suffers when you've been pounding carbs, regardless of what it is, right? You could be a super overweight person that's been drinking soda for the last 10 years, or you could be an off-season bodybuilder who's been pounding carbs trying to grow. At some point, most of us, our insulin sensitivity starts to suffer. And the best way to freshen that receptor up, the insulin receptor, is to lower carbohydrates, right? So a keto diet will do that very quickly. Then you can go back to eating carbs and you process them better and you don't store fat as easily, right? It's just freshening up the receptor. So people gain weight after a keto diet, not weight, fat, because we're all going to gain a little weight when you come off, which we're going to talk about in the next episode. People gain fat because, like most people do after any diet, they lose their mind a little bit and they go back out and they crush a buffet. And dieting causes issues with food in general. being keto is not the issue. The issue is, after dieting is over, and I'm the same way, by the way. I have issues with a little bit of the fuck it's, and I just want to eat too much food. I want to eat my kids' waffles. Like I might eat a whole huge stack of waffles, and then 2 days go by, and I'm like, well, I want to eat some more, right? So like the more restrictive you are, the more issues you might have with food. But it's not the keto diet that's the problem. It's dieting in general, right? Because that's what causes people to go off. The other one, muscle loss. People say, I don't want to do a ketogenic diet because it causes muscle loss. Here is the thing. Dieting causes muscle loss, and if you're not careful, because your protein can't be as high on a ketogenic diet, you can experience muscle loss if your protein's not set up the way that I talked about. Set it up 1 gram per pound of lean mass, and you will be okay. Like you really lose muscle when you get towards the end when you're real lean, if your protein's high enough. But if your
Yeah,
protein's
I
not
think
high enough,
obviously depends on where your calories are set, but I think people on that front misunderstand that depletion feeling and the fact that they might not be able to push their numbers as high in the gym with I'm losing muscle, and that's not the same thing.
yeah. Now, if somebody sets their protein real low, like that 20%, like we talked about, and it ends up putting their protein low, yeah, they're going to lose muscle fast. So it's definitely a myth because it just needs to be set up the right way. Um, Feeling terrible, that's another one. That's most people do it because their protein's either too high or they get to that keto flu state after 4 to 5 days and they're like, I'm not doing this ever again. I feel terrible. They think they're going to feel like that the whole time. They just
Mhm.
haven't they just haven't pushed all the way through. So that's once you get into a ketogenic state, I feel better than I do on any diet, hands down, year round. And I'm going to be doing more keto. I'm going to be kind of a flexible keto guy. Like I'll do it for a while, then I'll eat some carbs for a little bit, low carb, and then transition back to keto. And that's what I've been doing. But you'll feel better on keto for most people. And then I think the last thing we just kind of talked about this, it's easy to gain fat after it's over. It's not. It's just because most people do keto and it's so restrictive that they have a mental overeating episode after they're done. And like I said, we're all normal. The more you restrict, this is science. I've said this numerous times. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you restrict food extremely and you completely cut carbs out, that's your action. Well, the reaction is now you're going to add those carbs back in plus some. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Sometimes the reaction's even higher. So you want to be really careful if you have any kind of eating disorder or issues with food. A ketogenic diet is probably not going to be your best bet. It's not for everyone. It's to be used as a tool.
Yeah, and on the point of like getting fat afterwards, I think it's often also just again maybe miseducation or just not knowing that when we're reintroducing carbs, we're gonna obviously bind to water again in those cells and,
Yes.
and fill up glycogen stores. But yeah, we are going to talk about that in our question of the week next week, where we're literally addressing how to transition out of the ketogenic diet because that is so important. But I want to highlight that point that you made at the very beginning of this is not very likely not a long-term
Mm-mm.
solution or way to diet for the majority of people. But there is a place and time where a ketogenic diet can be super useful.
Yeah, and it can be a lot of fun. So, if you guys have questions, leave them in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching driving, our email and everything's listed in the show notes. You can always email both of us. We're glad to talk shop with you, help you in any way we can. But especially on YouTube, leave your comments below so everybody can see that, and we'll answer them and we'll make sure that we get all of that stuff taken care of. So this has been a fun episode. Stay tuned for the next one because we're going to talk about how to transition off of keto, right? That's our next episode, Lisa.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to talk about how not to do it and we're going to talk about the right way to do it. So, from Lisa and myself, we're out of here. See you guys.
See you.